go through the final exam topics, and then maybe review the general topics, of the quarter. And then if you have specific questions, I can address those. So any questions, any other? So, and also the exam is Wednesday at 3:30, and it's 2 hours long. And there are 30 questions. Some are really quick, like true, false, 1 or 2 point questions, and some are longer, more involved questions, and I'll go into a little more detail around that too. Okay. Any questions so far?
So, do we have to like follow a link, or will it be available on Canvas?
It'll be posted to Canvas just like we've done for the quizzes. So there'll be a link on Canvas in that last bottom section for next week, and the it uses this Respondus lockdown browser, but you don't need to really install anything. You just take it through Canvas. And I created this quiz, really short 1 question practice quiz with like an extra credit trivia question in there, so you can practice using the lockdown browser. So it'd be a good idea to do that, just to make sure you can launch it. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And the department had guidelines. They want the final exam to be worth something like between 20 and 40% of the total grade. So I chose the smallest percent possible. So in this class, it's basically worth 20%, but arguably even less than that, because I'm giving you like 5% for participation and then some extra credit and stuff like that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm not going to share my screen at first, but I'm going to kind of look through the final exam and just kind of make sure that I'm covering all the topics that the exam covers, because I kind of want to help you as much as I can without giving you the answers. Okay, so let me make one not fun announcement, kind of. So some of the other professors are kind of way more concerned about cheating than I would say I am. From my perspective, so a couple things. Object-oriented programming is all about reusing code. So if you're programming a board game, video game, and you go out to the web and you find existing code for rolling the dice, and you reuse that code in your program, some instructors would call that cheating. Well, in my opinion, that's actually object-oriented programming. That's the whole point. So I don't get too caught up on reusing sections of code. But what we don't want to see is 5 students all turn in a program and all 5 programs are identical. But the reason I say this is the first question on the exam is kind of a statement you have to sign off on, saying that you're not sharing answers and all that kind of stuff. But I bring this up because in the past, students have had WhatsApp, WeChat, Slack channels where they're sharing answers, even among the different sections. And if you kind of get caught doing that, there's not much I can do to help you, is what I'm saying. But mostly, the other call out I want to say is, we're all, for the most part, adults, and everyone's, for the most part, here voluntarily. So, you know, you can kind of cheat in this class, maybe improve your grade, but the bottom line is if you get into the UW or another program and you continue taking computer science, you're honestly only hurting yourself, because it's going to come back to bite you. You're just kind of postponing the pain, you know, down the road, because you're going to find yourself in even more difficult class. And if you haven't learned it, then you're going to fail that class, and you'll have all the more, you know, invested. So that's my lecture on that. Okay. So having said that, let me just kind of walk through the exam a little bit. So like I said, there's 30 questions. There's a setting on the exam that's, excuse me, it's turned on. Some of us voted against it, but it's turned on nonetheless. So it only shows one question at a time, and you have to, but you can skip that question and click next or previous to move to the other questions. And the other thing I want to call out is, even though it has that setting turned on, there's a list over on the right-hand navigation panel where it lists questions 1 through 30 numbered, and you can click on there and move to the other questions. So it's not that you're not forced to take any one question before moving on to the next one, because, you know, it's generally good test taking strategy to kind of first take a couple of minutes at the beginning of the exam and kind of relax and look at the whole exam and kind of size it up to figure out, like, okay, what are the easy questions? What are the tough questions? Which ones are you going to knock out first? Which ones might you do last if you're not sure of? So just be aware that even though it primarily only displays one question at a time, you can still navigate forward and back among the different questions. So any questions about that? Okay, you can still hear me, right?
Yep. So say, for
Okay.
example, we start on the first question. Honestly, we could just start saying, like, skip through it just to see the rest of them, and then we could go back and take the question if we didn't finish it, basically, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can click next and just skip that question and then come back to it.
Okay. All right.
But I'm just pointing this out because it's not, excuse me, it's not totally obvious. I mean, there's the next and previous button on the page, but it's not clear that you can click next and then come back to the question, you know, if you skip it, basically.
Yeah,
but
that makes sense.
You can do that.
Thanks.
I'm sorry, did you just say that the cameras are gonna be on?
No, there'll be no cameras.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and you were kind of gargly. Can you guys hear me okay right now?
Yep.
Yes, I can.
Okay. Okay, so be familiar. One topic is commenting, right? So remember when we say commenting out code, that doesn't mean delete the code. It means comment it out. And do you remember, what are the two different ways to comment out code?
Well, you can put like two of the forward slashes to create comments is one option.
Yeah, that's right. You can do, I'm going to put this in the chat for now. You can do 2 forward slashes, that comments out just that one line, or you can do /*, and then that comments out multiple lines, and then you end it with */. Whoops, and I did a question mark, but it should be a /. So just know about commenting the code. And I would say that for the most part, this exam is really focused on just coding. There's not, so for the most part, it doesn't necessarily, with the exception of a couple questions, it doesn't usually ask you to write code. It's more about understanding the code. So there are a lot of questions that will ask, it will present you with code, including things like if conditions or while loops or do while loops, and variables are getting incremented or calculated. And then the question will be, after this code runs, what's the value at the end? What does X equal after this code runs? And let me caution you too, I don't know about this exam, but sometimes these questions, right, they'll show a code section, a segment of just maybe 10 lines of code. And it's usually not a full program. And sometimes people answer something like, well, the answer is 0 or the answer is undefined because this code won't compile. And they're like overanalyzing it. They're not going to put questions like that on the exam. So if you only see, 5 lines of code and they're asking you, what does X equal after that code executes? Just assume that those lines of code are in a working program. Does that make sense?
And Professor, just a quick question. I don't know if this is going to be on the test, but what are the non-native data types in Java other than strings?
Oh man, I honestly would have to Google that. Non-native.
It's non-native the right word? Okay, what's the type? What data type is string? It's non-something because it's a special data type because it's an array of cars.
Oh, yeah. A string is a class library in Java that comes with a lot of pre-written methods in that library that are there available for us to use. So because of that, a string variable is actually an object.
Sorry, it's not non-native, it's non-primitive.
Oh yeah, same thing. So I can look up the list of primitive data types, but a primitive data type would be more like an int, whereas an int is a simple variable.
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, primitive data types are bytes, shorts, ints, longs, finals. No, not finals. Doubles, booleans, cars, and floats. Right?
Yeah, short, int, long, float, double, boolean, char.
Yeah, the only reason I know short and long are because of Rust. I don't know why on earth you would use those in Java.
Which one?
Shorts and longs. Oh, no, actually, long I can understand, but I don't know why you would use a short.
Yeah, I would have to honestly look that up.
It's a short is a data type that can store whole numbers from negative 32,768 to 32,767.
Well, part of what's happened is decades ago, memory was really expensive and really scarce. And so they did a lot of programming practices to use the most minimal amount of memory necessary. And that's still probably true for like the Mars rover. But in most programming we do today, memory is not an issue. The biggest issue is really the labor costs of the developer. So people can just kind of like, you could create double variables and just make everything a double and call it good, kind of, if it works. I mean, I'm over generalizing.
I disagree with you on the whole memory thing. I'd like to talk about Chrome's memory usage because my RAM just can't handle that.
Well, yeah, I mean, as the programs get more complex, yeah, it could become more an issue, and you definitely wouldn't want like a memory leak or something.
Right.
But a lot of those issues came from like 70s, 80s, 90s when it was like really limited memory.
Right.
But I can tell you, like, I don't remember seeing a question explicitly asking about those data types on the exam.
Let me think. What are some other? I'm trying to think of other like really difficult technical questions that might show up on the final exam, but I just can't think of any.
Well, so I'm gonna I'm walking through this like question by question and trying to help you without giving you like the full-on answers. But really, most of the questions involve really just proficiency in the, I would kind of call it like just the core syntax. So if you know if then conditions, and for loops and print statements and incrementing integer counters and simple arrays, not array lists, but just simple arrays. That's really the most of it. There's really a lot of questions that show a code sample, a short code sample, and then just ask you, okay, what is variable X equal after this code runs?
Got it. Yeah, well, in that case, I think I feel pretty prepared. I'm just used to my old, the exams in the Java class I took back in Texas, which was basically like entirely, not syntax, but like it was a CS class. It was about computer science. Very little of it was programming itself.
Yeah, and you know, my quizzes, I tend to focus a little more on the theory. I like questions like, you know, the Seahawks are implementing a new game scoring system. Draw the UML diagram to illustrate which classes we would use. There's no question like that on this exam. It's more just code, and not so much writing the code, but more understanding the code.
Yeah, it's the difference between computer science and software engineering, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, as you get into more advanced classes, they get more into data structures and stuff. At this level, though, you know, some students might be going into CS, some might take this as an elective, some might end up in like business IT. So it's a little more one size fits all, kind of.
Right.
Okay, so there's a question you'll want to know about print statements and print line statements. So remember, remember the print line statement includes the line return after the output, whereas the print statement does not. And I'd recommend you guys take notes on these topics too, so you know what to kind of review too. And then also just know about, for purposes of printing and console output, just things you can do for simple formatting in terms of concatenating strings, or you know, you might want an output statement where you print out I live in Seattle and today's high temperature is, and then you concatenate that with the temperature variable, and you include the necessary, you know, white space and line return and all that good stuff. So any questions about the print and print line statements? Okay. So again, no if statements, if else statements, how that impacts the program flow. And be careful with, remember, whether we're dealing with an if statement or a for loop or even a while loop, remember to take note of the conditional, and if it's if I is greater than 10, or if I is greater than or equal to 10, and you know how that impacts the output. If you're doing a loop, that might make the difference between looping 9 times versus 10 times versus 11 times, that sort of stuff. Okay. Hold on one second. Okay. Yeah, so then I think there's some questions on basic syntax, nothing really specific to call out there, but kind of like, here's some code, can you identify where the defect is in the syntax? Nothing too unique, just basic for loops, print statements, curly brace location, that kind of stuff. For loops again. Remember, know how for loops work. So we have like for int I equals 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus, you know, inside the loop, print hello world, something like that. I'm just scrolling through, making sure I'm not leaving anything out here. Do you remember, I believe we had a quiz question or a short exercise where the question was, write code following output, and output was like a pattern of characters. Or kind of, so we had that multi-array assignment. Oh, can you still hear me okay?
I think you got cut up a little bit. Could you please ask the question again?
Yeah, hold on one second. I'm going to relocate here, I think, for a second. Okay. Okay, can you hear me okay now?
Yep.
Okay. So we had the multi-array assignment, and I don't think there's necessarily a multi-array question on this exam, but there could be questions using the nested for loop. So remember how we use the nested for loops to where the outer loop does the rows and then the inner loop does the number of columns moving left to right?
Yep.
Okay, so you might want to review that. And I'll double check. I don't think there's a lot on multi-arrays per se on the exam, but I might double check that. Okay, so this would help if I had an example to explain, but let me look. Well, while I look for an example, I don't know if I have one ready, but let me just explain this other topic. So remember the scope of variables. So if you're in your main method and you pass a parameter argument from main to another method, okay? And in that other method, remember that was the what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. So if in that method you pass in x and x equals 10 and you say x equals x plus 2, so now x equals 12, and then you print x in that method, so it says x equals 12, okay, great. Back at main, x does not equal 12, it still equals 10. The way you would update x back in main, you would have to return it, have a return variable from that method. And then in main, if you were printing out the return variable, then it might equal 12. So that's a really common exam question where you're in main, x equals 10, they pass x to another submethod, and then the submethod says x times 2 or x plus 2 or whatever. That's great, it prints out. But back in main, the value of x has not changed because it's a local variable in the method. Any questions about that?
So usually would they like present code and we kind of explain that, or is it more we write code?
Most of the questions are like, it presents the code and then there's print statements and it's just asking you what's the output. So there might be, and let me see, I think I found a good example. Hold on one second. Okay, yeah, let me share my screen for 1 second to show this. Okay. Can you see my eclipse?
Yep.
Okay. So right here, we're in main, and we declare x and y. We say x equals 1, y equals 2. And then we call my method, and we pass in x and y. And when we go here to my method, so the return type is void. 1 and 2 get passed in. And now in my method, now we say 1 equals 25 and 2 equals 35.4. Okay. Okay, so now we're done with that method call, right? So now we're back here in main, back at the ranch. And now we have a print statement, and it prints out x and y. What do you think it's going to? Oh, I already ran it. So when you print it out, it prints out.
So would it be mostly like a multiple choice saying, oh, it's going to print out either 1 or 2 or 25, 35.4, that kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Most of the questions, they're not gonna ask you to write this, but the question will be, what is x and y equal? One option might be 25 and 35.4, and one option might be 1 and 2, and one option might be none of the above. But
Okay.
yeah. But if for some reason the sample code, just shows this code and they don't show like the beginning of the class, do not answer undefined. It would error out because they don't try to write questions like that, right? It's usually just kind of showing a code section. So.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
A quick question. If we put my method in a system out print line, would it print out 35 and 35.4?
Your connection's bad, so I totally can hear you, but can you put it in the chat? Can you just type the question in the chat? I can wait a minute. Can you want to just type? Well, okay, yeah. So if we wanted to print out the value 25 and 35.4, so there's a couple options. We could have a print statement in this method, and if we print right here, then 1 equals 25, 2 equals 35.4. Or if we change this return type from a void to an int, we could return the values. Now, as a side note to that, there's 2 values here, so we'd have to figure out, maybe we return an array with the values. Maybe we concatenate them, whatever. But without getting into that detail, we could return the values, and then down here we would go system.out.println, and we would print the return value that's put into a variable. Or you can sometimes do this, right? You can have a print statement, and then inside the print statement, you can actually put the method call, and you kind of do a 2-in-1 operation. So you like have a print statement, but you're printing the method call. But see, in this instance, that doesn't work because the method doesn't return anything. But if it did return something, you could just print the method call, and then it would print the return value.
Thank you.
But,
Got it.
Yeah.
Is my mic not working? Or should I like talk more loud?
You're kind of staticky. I think it's on your end, but you can just type. You guys can type questions if the connection's bad.
Okay, thank you.
But I would say on the exam, there seemed to be a lot of questions like different variations of this kind of stuff, where it's really not touching upon necessarily complicated specific topics, but it's more just a general knowledge of the syntax, if conditions, for loops, the method calls, that kind of stuff, and then saying, okay, here's the code. What are the values of X and Y when it outputs? I should keep the chat open. Okay, let me go back to the exam. And if you have any questions, just chime in, because I'm just kind of reviewing the exam here. I only saw this recently, so.
Are there many questions about exceptions and arrow throwing, that kind of thing?
I think there's one or two, and definitely could be. I'll know more.
How many questions are there?
30 questions. Some are really quick, like true, false, really quick questions. Others are more involved, and then those are worth more points. So yeah, know about the method calls and the scope of the variables in terms of in main versus in the methods. Oh, okay. Double check something. Okay. Remember the pet store program where we overload the speak method?
Yep.
So know about method overloading. So remember in the superclass, that was like pet. There might be a speak method, and the speak method, I don't know, says 1, 2, 3, or I'm your pet or whatever. And then when people extend that class and create additional types of animal, cat, if the cat method has its own speak method with the same declaration, that will override the method in the superclass, in the pet class. And so if you create an object C1 of type cat and call C1.speak, then it won't say I'm your pet. It will say meow meow for the cat speak method. So any questions about method overloading? Oh. Okay, I have a huge apology, and because I just misspoke. So, sorry. That is method overwriting, where we created the speak method in the extended pet classes. So any questions about that, the method overriding, where we override the method in the superclass? And then I'll explain overloading now to clarify this, since I just completely confused the topic.
Yeah, when you're saying overriding, is that writing as in WRITING or RIDING?
Overriding, like override, like override on a horse or something.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
Yeah, so that was overriding. Overloading is when we create in the same program multiple versions of the same method, but each version contains different numbers or types of parameters. So that was in, I think, the bank program. Let me take a quick look here. This code doesn't have that one. Okay, hold on one second. I think it's down here. Yeah, okay, let me share my screen really quick. Okay, so I think we went to this code earlier this quarter. This is the student meal card program where they're putting value on a stored value card, kind of like a Starbucks card, like a gift card. So here, there's two different versions of the meal card method. So these are this is overloading. So this method takes only one parameter, a student object. The second method takes two parameters, a student object and a number of points as an integer. So if we create a meal card and we only pass in the student name, it just loads it up with the default points, which is 100. If we create a meal card and we pass in both the student object and a custom amount of points, like 50 or 1,000, it will know to automatically call this method because the parameters match. So this is method overloading. The other example is overwriting.
I have a quick question. So in the second meal card constructor, whichever, do you have to use this dot student, or can you just say student equals student? Would that be the same thing or no?
Oftentimes you don't need this operator, and it would still work. But using this operator explicitly identifies it as the field in this same class that we're in.
Okay, but it would work either way.
Not always. I actually need to look that up to find out the nuance. I think it's better syntax and style to use it. It makes it more explicit.
Okay, makes sense.
Okay. So again, know about loops. So difference with a for loop versus a while loop versus a do while loop. And remember, a do while loop executes the code inside the curly braces one time and then checks the condition in the while loop to decide if it should continue looping or not. A while loop immediately evaluates the condition in parentheses, and if that condition is not true, we'll never enter the code inside the curly braces no matter what, not even if it never enters it, or even if it never enters it. Any questions about that?
Can you repeat the do while again?
So a do while executes the code in between the brackets one time and then checks the while condition. So you're guaranteed to execute the code one time no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking for examples like this, but if we had like do and inside the curly braces, or I equals 0 inside the curly braces, print hello world, and then while I is greater than 10, it'll print hello world once, and then it will be done with a loop. So with a do while loop, you're guaranteed to execute the code one time no matter what.
That makes sense. Okay.
So yeah, several questions about while loops. Okay, hold on one second. Okay, the scanner object. Remember, we use the scanner object to read in input from the keyboard or even from a file. So let me share my screen here again. Oops. Okay, you can see Eclipse, all right?
No. Yeah, there we go.
Okay, so here we include import java.util.star. We declare scanner object named scanner with a lowercase s equals new scanner system.in. And then we have search term or string value variable equal to scanner.nextLine. Okay, and I'm looking for another example here. Hold on. Okay, you can see Eclipse, right?
Yep.
Okay. Here, this was one of those variations of the word search program. So here, we declare an array of strings. So the name of the array is word list. We know it's an array because it's got the brace. And then to the left of that is the data type. So it's an array of strings. So here we're both initializing and creating and populating the array with default values. So it's just a curly brace and then the list of strings in double quotes separated by commas. So just remember that you can also initialize an array like that, like boom, right off the top.
Hello?
I can't, you're kind of breaking up. You want to type in the chat?
So is this like a question about how to like initialize an array?
Yeah, so you'd want to know how to do this right here.
Oh, okay.
And then the other part is where did my chat window go? Oh, do not worry about J option pane. That's for the pop-up box. That's not really covered on the exam and technically wasn't covered this quarter. That's the graphic stuff. You can replace that with a simple print line statement. So the other component to this to know with regard to simple arrays, here we're looping through the array and we're outputting the value at each address location. So and this is a standard for loop here. So and you can see Eclipse now, right?
No, you just stopped sharing actually.
Stop, sorry. Okay. So for int I equals 0, I plus. So one comment on this dot length property. If we know the length of the array is 10, we could just say for int I equals 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus. Because remember, the array address index is 0 based. So if it has length 10, it has address locations 0 through 9, not 1 through 10. So because of that, the length is 10. We want to increment as long as I is less than 10, meaning 9. Word list is an array, and because it's an array, it will have the property dot length. But if word list was an integer variable, like an int, that's not going to have a dot length property. That would just have the value 10 or whatever it is. But because this is an array, we can say less than word length dot length. And then as we loop through, here we're just outputting the value at each array location. So system.out.println, array position, end quote. And then I'm concatenating here plus I, and notice I had to include the white space there. I will be, that's informational, that's the address we're looping through in the array. So that'll be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Concatenate plus equals, concatenate plus, and then this will output the value in the array at position I. So word list of brace I brace. If I is 3, that's not going to output 3. That's going to output the value at address location 3. So address location 3 is 0, 1, 2, 3. That's Spokane. So I would say, yeah.
Sorry, just a quick thing about this. So you talked about kind of formatting in white space earlier. So is it fine if we either do a space after, like, or before the end of quote, or we could like concatenate an empty space? Would both ways work, or is it like?
Yeah, both ways would work. So if I want array position, semicolon, space, and then the number, I could hard code the white space right here, or I could go plus, quote, space, quote, plus, stuff like that.
Yeah, and on the exam, it's not like find the most like clean way to do it. It's just whichever way works.
Well, I think there's a couple questions where it's like they might write. Let me show an example here. It might have an output like this, like that. And the question will be, which of the following println statements will produce that output?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there might be different options and they might get kind of tricky. You know, system.out.println. Whoops. So we live in space, end quote, concatenate. Maybe stir city is a string. And that equals Bellevue. So maybe in that particular code, that would produce the output, we live in Bellevue.
Oh, okay.
But, you know, different instructors have different styles, and we all kind of contributed to some of these questions. So someone might get really tricky and do this, and then that would be a wrong answer because it's missing the white space. So then that would actually produce that.
Yep.
So. Okay, where did my chat window keeps disappearing? Sorry. Let's see. So as far as the format, it's a little mix of everything. I don't think there's many essay questions. It's mostly true, false, multiple choice, or like fill in the answer. There will not be JUnit on the exam. There could be, though, error handling in terms of try catch blocks and assertions.
For assertions, should we like know like the assertion class and all that stuff, or?
No, just at a very high level. And I'm not even sure there's any questions on assertions, but it would be fair game.
Will there be any questions where like it gives us like it can, or it tells us to write a piece of code that does something?
But potentially like a short. So I think there's a question where you might have to write. I'll get to it in a minute, but I think you might have to write like an example of the class or an example of the method. But it's not many. It's not like a full program.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of questions asked, showing a section of code and then asking what the output will be. And see, I have to like bite my tongue because I'm not supposed to share too much information. So with the lockdown browser, I believe it prevents you from opening Eclipse. However, I have read some hacks online that makes it sound like people have found ways to do that. But I can honestly say I'm not sure if that's been proven, or maybe that could be a different installation of Canvas or lockdown browser, who knows what. So I'm not saying it's impossible to launch Eclipse, but don't count on it. And then the other thing they did too is like where you see code examples, it's an image file. So don't count on just, oh, I can just copy and paste the code into Eclipse and run it and I'll know the output. You could, and then you might think, well, if I have Eclipse, I can just retype the code in. But that's part of the reason there's so many questions that you won't have time to do that, basically. Do you know what I mean? So long story short, just you want to know the answer. You don't assume you can be dependent on like, oh, I'll just type everything into Eclipse and run it. It'll just give me the answer. But you know, having said that, these code sections are not that long. So, does that make sense? Okay. And then do you remember? Do you remember the different types of exceptions as far as like array index out of bounds exception, where we were looping and we go one too many times off the end of the array, that kind of thing? And then we had like the data type exceptions where we're using a scanner object and we might have like scanner dot next int, but we input a letter and the program crashes. So you want to be just at a high level familiar with the different types of exceptions, the error handling and exceptions. And most of these topics like that, you know, there's not going to be 5 questions on that, but there might be 1 or maybe 2. Does that make sense? Yeah, you can still hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'll never forget. I talked for an hour once when I worked at Microsoft on a spec review call with this team in India, and I lost the connection. I literally talked for an hour. So ever since that, like I always validate that I'm still online. Okay. Then it's like, you know, you're writing a paper and then you lose you lose the file or you lose the code, and then writing it the second time just totally sucks. Like yeah. Okay. Okay. I'm looking for another good example here.
There was a question in the chat.
Okay. yeah, exactly. So identify what type of exception it could be. Okay. So the other thing is here, this was our rolled dice example. So this program, you can see my Eclipse now, right?
Yep.
Okay. So here's the dice class, and this simulates the dice like in a board game. So, oh, sorry, that's, I'm still showing roll dice. Hold on. Okay. Class dice. This is simulating the dice in a board game. So here's our constructor. Here's the method roll that produces a random number 1 to 6. And then we have a get method like get number. Then in the roll dice class, we have our main method. And so here we create an object named 1 of type dice. So now that we create our object, now we come down here, and the name of our dice object is 1. So here we have, well, this declares it, and this creates the object and allocates the memory for it. 1 equals new dice. So down here on line 18, now we refer to the name of the object. So we don't say dice.roll to call the roll method. We say 1.roll to call the roll method because the name of our dice object is named 1. And so when we want to access the data fields or the methods of that object, the object dot and then the name of the method. So here's like 1.get number, 1.roll, 1.get number. So when I run this, whoops, that's not the one. Okay, so it says results are 3, 1, 5. So just be familiar at a high level with creating, here we have a class, right? So you might have to write maybe 3 or 5 lines of code to use this class. So here's the class dice. How would we create an object of the dice class? And then using that object, call these methods. Just a couple questions on the general format and using objects of classes. Okay, any questions about that? Okay. Yeah, so know how to do this. If you're given a short class, create an object of that class, and then call the methods. And this could be in a multiple choice type question where there's like 5 options, only one of them is valid syntax. Or it might even ask you to potentially write maybe 3 or 4 lines of code to do that. Okay, so another concept I wanted to cover. Let me look for a good diagram of this. Guess this will work. Okay, I'm going to share a different window here. Okay, see this diagram here?
Can you repeat that?
Can you see this diagram?
Yeah.
Okay. I think at times sometimes I and others misspeak on this, but there's also kind of sometimes inconsistent terminology around this. But on the exam, the superclass is like the top class, the original class, would be the pet in our pet store example. The subclass is the classes we create by extending the superclass. There's a few different variations of this terminology out there, and I think I've been guilty of not always being consistent, but this is the superclass, especially for purposes of this exam, the original class that we're extending to create additional classes. Okay, so any questions about that? This would be like superclass could be bank account, subclass could be checking account versus and savings account. So checking account and savings account would extend the superclass bank account.
Does the superclass have a main method all the time?
Not really. You know, let me share a clips for a minute here. So if I go to one of these bank programs, I thought I had a bank program here with a checking and savings account. Hold on. I'm not sure where that went. Okay, wait, maybe it's in the address. Okay, here we go. So here's the address book. Here's a version of the address book code. So test address book has the main method. This is what you would run to run the program. But the classes are just the data entities for each of these objects. So person would be the superclass. And then we would extend that into types of people contacts. So business associate extends person for business contact. Personal friend class extends person for a personal contact. But these are just classes. The program to run all this stuff would be like in this test address book Java program. And here is the main method here, like to actually run it.
So we literally write extend.
Yeah, the keyword to extend the superclass would be extends. Like class business associate extends person. And that's what we used in the pet store example.
Is this going to be on the exam as well?
This topic will.
Okay, thank you.
Like write out this whole program, and it could be even a multiple choice type thing. Like which of the following would extend the person class to create the business associate class? And something like this might be the answer. Okay. All right. Okay, hold on one second here. Let me review one thing. Okay, sorry, one second. Okay. Can you still hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So there is, I would say, one big program, one big question on the exam that does ask you to write, I would say, a significant amount of code given the time limit. And it is not the type of question that I personally would put on an exam, but it's there. But here is my advice to you. Do not skip it. It's worth, let me double check something. It's kind of worth a lot of points. And if you let me help you help yourself. If you skip it, there's no legitimate way I can give you any points for that, right? If you do it and it's basically wrong, I can look for ways to give you partial credit, and half credit of a program of a question worth a lot of points could still be a lot of points. You know what I'm saying? So it's up to you, your test taking strategy, if you want to do that question first or last or whatever. But if you skip it, I can't help you. So don't, this is a general test taking strategy that I haven't always been the best at. Don't panic. If it looks scary, take a deep breath and just invest the time, read it for a minute, maybe read it a second or third time, map it out, and then just start plugging away at the stuff that you do know, and likely everything will just kind of fall into place. But if you do it, I'm always trying my best to get partial credit or 80% credit or whatever. But if you just flat out skip it, the entire letter grade on the exam will probably drop by a full letter grade, given just as the percent of points. Does that make sense?
Does each teacher grade their students' tests?
Yeah. So what happened was, we all have different styles. I'm more liberal artsy. I tend to focus, for me, the programming assignments are about writing the code, and the quizzes and exams are more about the theory and the concepts. But the other instructors don't see it like that. So some of the other instructors would give exams which is code. You almost don't even need to understand what you're doing as long as you can write the code. So the dean it makes sense. It's a good idea. Or the program director is trying to standardize all of us and get all of these 6 or 7 instructors kind of on the same page, but we still kind of have our disagreements and our different styles. So they've standardized the exam now. We all give the same exam, because in the past, some of the instructors were way more difficult than others. But we all still grade our own section. That may change in the future. And I'm probably one of the more lenient graders. But again, if you don't answer the question, I can't help you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So is this test tailored so that you can exactly do it within the time? It seems like there's a big programming question, then 29 other questions. So is it once we go through all of them, it will be time's up?
What I usually find, so it's 2 hours. I usually find that if it's a 2-hour exam, most people might finish in an hour and a half. And the people still working on it down to the last minute are the people that are either really struggling, or it's the 4.0 student that's intent on not missing a single point. But most people, I think, tend to finish with a little extra time. But they've been really concerned about cheating. And there's this feeling, especially when the test is online, that basically if you had 10 hours to do the test, everyone would get every question right, because you could research everything and spend a lot of time and just keep working on it until it's all correct. So I think there's been a general strategy to make it so that there's almost so many questions that you can't finish the exam, but the intent there is that they want you to kind of know the material and not really have enough time to just Google everything forever to get it right, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I don't know. I agree with the goal that they're trying to do, but if it was up to me, I would rather write my own exam, because I think the assignments are for the coding. The test should not necessarily be for the coding. But, at the end of the day, programming is coding, so I get it. But so I can review the lecture notes that we went through this quarter, but I essentially just went through the exam. Like I basically just looked at the exam question for question and tried to review the topics in a general sense without explicitly telling you what's on the exam. So if you took notes or if you listened, I basically just covered everything on the exam. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So it's pretty much the core. The core material is like for loops, while loops, if conditions, initializing arrays, knowing how to create the object of a class, call the methods of a class, access the data fields of a class. What else did we cover? There's several questions that all kind of revolve around different versions of the same topic, basically. And most of the questions are like, here's some code, what's the output? And then it's like multiple choice regarding if the output, does X equal 5, 7, or 12? Couple quick true, false, multiple choice questions. And then there's that one big question. And again, like just don't skip the big question, just do something so I can award you some points there, even if you feel like you're struggling with it. But I don't think even that question is too bad. You just want to read it, relax, take your time, analyze it, don't panic, and just, kind of take the time to kind of map out an answer before you start thinking about the code for it.
Sorry, you by skipping the big question, you mean like we can't skip it, right? I mean, temporarily. That's what you mean.
Yeah, you can advance forward and back and come back to a question. But for instance, if the exam is worth 100 points and the big question is worth 10 points, if you skip it right there, then the max you could get would be 90 out of 100, right?
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. Yeah, I generally try to help you when I grade, but again, the attendance helps you, the extra credit helps you. But then there's, at the end of the day too, like I had a class where a student did all these assignments and did okay, but then did really poorly on the exam. But I mean, like he was missing, the questions he was missing were so basic. I mean, the thought going through my mind was like, oh my God, I don't know if I can justify giving, raising his grade at all if he can't even tell me what the third element in an array is, right? I mean, so I'll do everything I can to help you, but at the same time, like, you got to know the material too, if that makes sense.
And since this is on Canvas, are there going to be some questions that we get our grade to, but then the rest is you're going to grade it, kind of like the quizzes?
Oh yeah, Canvas automatically grades like multiple choice, but even those I manually will review because sometimes Canvas gets a little wonky with that, so I manually verify it.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so a quick note. So the exam again is next Wednesday at, I believe, 3:30, but let me double check here to make sure I'm not misspeaking. Yes, so it's next Wednesday, 3:30, and you have 2 hours, so you want to start that at 3:30. If in the future, a lot of students often will need letters of recommendation. It could be for anything. It could be for a job as a tutor. It could be for college transfer applications, all that. I'm always happy to do it, but please give me as much advance notice as possible. Like even this week, I had a former student from last year ask me to write a letter of recommendation. I'd love to do it, but it's like due Friday and I'm totally slammed at work this week. So I'm always happy to do that. Try to give me advance notice. And then I highly recommend LinkedIn too. I'm on there. I've had students from years ago that now work at Amazon, Microsoft, everywhere. And I mean, I've reached out to them and said, hey, I have a friend applying there. Do you know who the hiring manager is? You know, just part of networking and stuff. So I highly recommend LinkedIn for recruiting and job postings and stuff. And feel free to reach out in the future for any kind of letters of recommendation or anything like that.
Thank you so much for the offer.
Okay. All right, so that's all I have for the review. So good luck on your finals next week, and feel free to email me with any questions too.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.